And now, the Two Guys, One Shaker Cup podcast, hosted by Joshua Shaw and Ryan Buckeye.
What's up, everybody? Welcome inside Two Guys, One Shaker Cup podcast. It is your boys, not men. We're boys right now, Josh. We're boys until the election. That's what we're going to be. Today, we're talking about, actually, it's a super interesting topic for me because you traditionally look at like foreign expos. So if you want to look at Body Power when it existed, or you look at FIBO when it existed, a lot of brands are at these events that I have never heard of, that you have probably never heard of. But there's also American brands there that have lines because people in Europe and all these different places, they like American brands. They wish they could have the Americanized version of pre-workout in their countries. They can't due to regulations, but it's interesting because it's the other brands, the ones that are prevalent in the UK, prevalent in Europe, prevalent in Australia, Brazil, all these different countries that us Americans are, I'm not going to say ignorant to. We just don't know and don't care because they can't offer or haven't been able to offer something to us that we want in the States. So is it worth paying attention, I guess, is the first question. And is there a brand that can cross over into the U.S. market? That's a good conversation. I know that our UK, our European listeners, followers are probably like hitting their mouths right now thinking that there's a couple. I know that some have tried and some are coming over now in the food side of things. But still, when it comes to putters and caps, I haven't seen a lot of movement in that area, but that could and should change.
Yeah, for me, the first couple international trade shows that I went to, this is, in the early 2010s, when I'd walk around the trade show floor, I didn't know many of those brands. Now, very few come across that have some type of growth that I'm like, I've never seen these guys before. And I think that's because of social media. I think being that now we can just see everything, and if you search around Instagram, you don't necessarily even know sometimes where these brands are originating from. So you just see a cool brand and you're like, oh, this is awesome. And then you do some research and realize, oh, this is from Sweden, or this is from Germany, or, the UK or whatever. And I think that that's something unique because of social media. It's made the world a lot smaller. Right. And then, if you think about just as what happened in the US, you talked about them moving over to Europe, and for the longest time, U.S. brands went over to these countries and just kind of dominated them. And I know that's going to piss some people off, but really, that was, the brands, they moved over and they took over those countries. And then during probably the last 5 to 7 years, you've seen a lot of in-country brands step up their game. And now it's a lot harder to compete as a U.S. brand in a lot of those countries or a lot of those regions because these brands have done a really good job. They've done such a great job that they've actually been able to garner enough of attention in their part of the world or even globally that now they're interested in coming over to the U.S. And you've seen, over the last decade, varying levels of degree of success. I would say if you are, considering a win-loss rate, and you relate it to baseball, that's the only chance you probably have as a good one. Because any other sport, a 3 out of 10 or a 2 out of 10 wouldn't be very good. But no. They're definitely not a resounding win in the U.S. And that's because there's so many nuances, and just the size of the U.S. market is just dwarfs anything they're used to. I mean, California is the 5th biggest economy in the world. One state. So if you think about, when you move from the UK and then all of a sudden you come over to the United States, just one of our states is, almost 1.5 times bigger than their whole country. Right. So it becomes like a very complex machine where then you're like, okay, I have to cut through all this noise. Now there's 10,000 brands to compete with, not, 5,000 or 500 brands or something like that. So it's just a different environment. But recently, I think we've seen some that have come across that have been getting a little bit more attention. And that's kind of where I wanted to kind of focus on, is just the idea that we are in a global, economy and in a global category. And I think it's important for us to pay attention to them, because if not, there's going to be one that takes our lunch one of these times that we're not going to be paying attention to. So it's one of these things where I think people need to start paying a little bit more attention.
Yeah, I think you can reach anybody on a global scale via the internet, right? So, I mean, whether it be eBay and Alibaba and Amazon, like you can reach anybody to anything. Social media, you can reach anybody with your messaging. And I think it is interesting because we take a look at American brands who essentially when American brands come out, their first thought process would be let's dominate American market, and then from there we'll expand. I don't think there's many American brands, if any at all, it says let's be an American brand but launch in Europe. I know that's not the case, but there are a bunch of American brands that do much better overseas than they do in America. So we've talked about that a lot on this podcast. But really, when you start to think about some of these European or foreign brands kind of making their way into our market, they have something to offer that currently either not here or just maybe a different look or feel to them that piques our interest. And a couple of brands, one brand I mentioned on the start of this podcast, there's not a lot of pills and powders really in these foreign brands that are making headway in the States. And I'm not saying this brand is making headway, but it's one that's caught my attention. And Josh, I think you've probably seen it too based on the branding, but the brand called Sneak. So they use a bunny. Sneak Energy is their energy drink. They have a cool look. Admittedly, their cans and their labels and graphics look cool. They're doing a phenomenal job on social media. But again, we actually, before we started this podcast, Josh and I were talking about how perception is not always reality. So just because we see them on social doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing anything of substance in an Americanized market. But I think even just having a presence or having visibility to the end consumer here, I mean, this Sneak Energy has a U.S.-based website. They are based out of Manchester, I believe is their HQ. But it's one that I find to be intriguing, to be interesting. Admittedly, I still don't know a whole hell of a lot about them. I've never had any of their products, but it's something that I look at and said, like, I think that this look and feel, assuming, and again, formulas mean nothing for 95% of people in this country, but based on their look and feel, I think this is something that could potentially do okay in America if they continue down the path of their marketing that they've done via social and via other aspects of things.
Yeah, they've taken an approach towards gaming, and I think that that's segmented the market pretty good for themselves. I've seen a lot of their even like videography and photography, and they do a really good job at presenting themselves extremely well. So I think just having that and coming over and knowing just how big gaming is across not just our country but all the world, there's some potential there. I don't know if I've gotten to the point of understanding how deep they are ingrained into the esports world of like, is it super authentic or not? My sense is it is, but I haven't, done the time or the due diligence to kind of look into it. But just off of face value, it feels very authentic. It seems like the way that they're talking is very authentic. And that alone, being that they have a unique maybe offering or unique look, they could get some traction as long as they can understand the U.S. market. Right,
exactly. And I think that sometimes is always the most difficult part of this. It's not like, can you create a cool product? Can you create a cool package design? It's like, can you understand your consumer? Because I always think about things in the fashion world. I think the fashion world is a great place to always have these conversations because traditionally fashion trends start where? There. And then they come here. Like, they don't start in America. They really never have. It's what's cool in Europe then comes to New York and L.A., the big cities, and Chicago, and then all of a sudden, those in Austin, like the hippies down in Austin, like Josh Shaw decides, like, hey, I can wear that. I can get by with that. Like, I can walk the streets with this. And then you get me here in the Midwest who, like, buys the stuff from garage sales after it's no longer cool. That's how fashion works. But in sports supplements or nutrition, we start the trend. Like, America kind of starts the trend. We have, not to say there's not ingredient manufacturers. There's tons of ingredient manufacturers in China and all these different places. But we have some of the most reputable ingredient researching institutions in the world here in America. And there's a bunch of big-time ingredients that are used in supplements now. But I think, again, case in point, like, you look at some of these Americanized brands that do extremely well across seas because, like, we are the trendsetters. We are the ones that are, quote unquote, cool. But in the fashion world, it's a complete role reversal. So, you look at trying to understand your consumer. I could tell you, and this is actually a good question for you, Josh, is like when you go into these meetings and the brand that has decided to employ you on a project says, like, listen, we're trying to break into the UK market. I mean, is your first thing demographic reports or some sort of like asking those questions, like who your target market, and then trying to understand the consumer buyer behavior in that country versus what it is here?
Yeah, I think your first step is really to understand that do you have the right, product mix that matches the market, the right pricing, the right, whatever it is, you kind of have to match and align everything together. And if there are some type of misalignments or constraints into the system that's not going to make it work, you either have to fix those things first, or you try your best to kind of push through it with maybe you have extra budget or whatever to kind of like push it through the system.
Right.
But for the most part, you're making sure that everything matches the thing. It's not just a matter of trying to figure out how fast and how big you can grow. It's like, where are your best fit at? Because it's one thing to get on shelf or get in country. It's another thing to actually be able to get that product pulled off the shelf and actually create velocity. That's where this all works. So it's one thing to be able to just ship your products over here and get them onto maybe some of the e-commerce sites or sell some stuff on Amazon. It's another thing to actually be able to get enough of turns that you become a active part of the U.S. sports nutrition or functional CPG market. And I think that that's where a lot of the brands fall short of. They don't get to that point of actually being into the conversation. Yeah, they're over here. They might be selling $1 million, $2 million or whatever. But like, if you ask a common consumer, they're not going to really know these names, but they might be doing 20 times that in their country or the region. It's just that for whatever reason, they haven't been able to create the velocity, create the pull that is needed because maybe they're not differentiated enough. Like you said, maybe they don't understand the consumer enough. Whatever it is, something's falling short.
You mentioned functional, and I kind of said like that's where I've seen more of the crossover, right? Like Grenade. Now we've seen barbells come in, or bear bells. Actually, I think it's actually how you pronounce it, right? Bear bells and NOCCO. And like you think about just food in general, like Toblerone candy bars, right? Wasn't that like a Swiss chocolate bar that then was purchased by Mondelez, and then now it's here? Like that's really where I kind of see things going. Is like the food thing, for whatever reason, is a lot easier because maybe there's less regulations. They don't have to change the product. They don't have because. Admittedly, you're not going to bring a pre-workout that's approved in Europe to America because it's going to be weak compared to what we're used to in this country. So you have to reformulate it. But I think that there's definitely potentials for functional brands to really come over here because food, for the most part, is food. You're not adding in weird shit. So Bear Bells, NOCCO, Grenade, for instance, their bars and spreads. I think, Grenade, for instance, like you walk into a vitamin shop, you see them on the store shelves. Like that is, you don't see... and maybe you know better than I do, like you walk into a vitamin shop, I would say 98% of those brands are probably brands from the States, if not higher than that, with maybe a couple here or there that might get some placement due to, I don't know, preference because there's a relationship there or something. But again, when it comes down to putters and caps, that's the tough part. But then you also want to look, if we broaden this and we just look at like the fitness industry, then we can extend it and say, okay, well, then there is fashion. There are brands like Father Sons, which is a clothing brand that their prices on their website are in, I don't even know what that symbol is, but it's not American,
Pounds.
Right? Yes, there you go. It's not USD, okay? But they do a good amount of sales in America because it's a fashion thing and bodybuilders like to wear it. But again, if we are solely focusing on sports nutrition, I would love to see, it would be interesting, like, who do you think is the best brand or the best crossover brand to come into the country, not from Canada, not from Mexico?
If we're
based on success,
like
based on what
sales,
you think.
Sales level?
Yeah, sales success. I mean, but take out food. Take out food and just stick with what we know as sports nutrition. Just
sports nutrition. I would say because of maybe length of time, and this is, I guess, maybe taking out, like, my protein would be first.
Sure. Okay. Good call.
That one would be first. Now, if we're considering past my protein, because they live online anyway, so it's one of those things where it's a, they have U.S. operations and everything, so I'm not going to take that away from them. But they're far and away the biggest in terms of sales in the U.S. market of a European brand. But then I would say probably USN from South Africa. They've been in the market now for 5 to 7 years or more at this point in the U.S. market. And they do sell a lot of the caps, powders, pills still. They haven't really diversified. They haven't diversified all that much into some of the food and beverages. And to your point around the food and beverage part of it, it's like a double-edged sword because what makes them unique in the UK or Europe or wherever it is a lot of times like food quality and production, maybe simplicity or whatever. They have different standards. Sometimes those things are better. As an example with the chocolate, like if they were to use maybe a chocolate coating or something, their manufacturers maybe know processes or maybe know the way to compile that in a way that works better for their market, and it's great. The issue is when you start to move that over to the U.S. is if you ship that over, then you have a bunch of cost into something that already has low margin. So then you're kind of screwed there.
Yep.
Then if you move over manufacturing, then you're going to have to deal with the constraints in the U.S. market on how those contract manufacturers want to do things. So you're going to be working against that wave. So there's a lot of issues in terms of like food and beverage. I think beverage a little bit less because a lot of the co-packers are international in the sense of you could work with one and they'll be able to transfer everything over. But from a food standard, kind of thing, or even the way that they like things compiled, maybe sugar alcohols in the UK or whatever, they tend to lean on those a little bit more than we do in the US market. Things like that start to erode a little bit at like the success or like the chance of success because you're eating away at your margin, or you're dealing with in-country manufacturing that you're going to have to deal with some of those complexities. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. I think that's their way to get in because that's their uniqueness, but then there's also the challenges that come with it.
Interesting you brought up USN. I totally, for whatever reason, that slipped my mind. I work with USN, so it's like one of those brands. But to me, now, I guess I didn't even think of them as a foreign brand because they've been here. And they've have a presence in the States. Now they can obviously grow, and that's what they're trying to do. But they have done, they have a solid protein. They have collagen. They have a bunch of cool stuff. That they do, and their offices are kind of like all over. They have people spread all over, Connecticut, Florida, et cetera. So they are good. My Protein, obviously being a digital brand, they are just that's the thing, right? So I think My Protein being a digital brand has kind of blurred those lines a bit in terms of like, is this an American brand? Is this a UK brand? Like there are brands that for a fact, like this originated here. And there are a lot of people that probably know about My Protein, but I think they're so big now and successful that I don't think a lot of people would look at that and say this is a foreign brand nowadays. Maybe they still do. I don't know. But like I look at them and think and I think that's when you've made it. That's when you become successful. When somebody looks at you and says you're not a U.S. based brand, you're not an EU based brand, you're just a global brand, and that's obviously success. That in their case, because they live online and they're not. Are they brick and mortar at all?
I think they're changing over some strategies here in the U.S., but until that point, it's been all direct to consumer.
Yeah. So I mean that right there, just like so, then there could be like a different realm. Like, okay, this isn't a geographical brand at all. Like this is just a straight digital brand with no geographical constraints. But again, like to your point, I think you mentioned something extremely relevant to this in terms of if you're producing in Europe, you're producing in the UK, and you're shipping across that big pond to here, that it doesn't make sense between customs and everything else that you deal with. Like it's if you don't have a co-packer here in the States, it damn near makes it impossible because the fees on and the imports, it's absolutely crazy. And I don't even know how to paint a picture for those listening. Like to understand, I get people all the time like, Ryan, can you ship me something to Canada? Yeah, I could, but like literally to ship a box, like a parcel box, a 4x4 box, it ends up costing like $35-$40 for one item. Like that's because of customs and because of what you have to do in terms of like the transportation. Now you obviously aren't going to be shipping just one box. You're going to be shipping a pallet. Then are you doing it via boat? You're doing it via air, and there's just a ton of cost to it. Again, another example is I had somebody in South Africa that wanted me to ship them a half a pallet only. It was going to be like $1,200 to ship that half a pallet. There's no margin left in that product. In fact, you're probably losing money. So it's extremely hard to do that. And if you want to do that, like I think you have to. You can't just wake up one day and say, "Hey, I want to sell my product in the United States." Like you need to have a full encompassing strategy, which includes your logistical standpoints in terms of production, because I think that's going to be the biggest pain point. Your shipping and production is going to be the biggest pain point. If you can't overcome that hurdle, there's no fucking way you're going to be successful here.
Yeah. The initial kind of launch is, just to get to see test traction, whatever. You can just flat or lose money just to see how the reaction is in the market. Right. But eventually you have to have that as a plan in your map and say, I'm going to need in-country manufacturing. Because to your point, when a U.S. brand ships over to, say, South Africa, they're tending to work with a master distributor. That master distributor is consolidating a bunch of brands together in a shipping container at a freight forwarder in New Jersey or Florida or something like that, where they'll ship it all over in a 20 or 40 foot container on a boat. But for a food product or a beverage product, depending on meltability, depending on how long you have on your expiration date, it's like those things sit a little bit of time, especially if they haven't timed up all the shipments together. It's like that could sit at port for 4 months or something like that, and then you have a 9-month best of expiration date. All of a sudden, by the time it gets landed to and sold to some of the like retail stores, it might have 3 months left of expiration. So that's what holds back a lot of that. So if you are a brand that's not necessarily pulling a bunch of other things together, you're dealing with what you just said with like South Africa. Like you have to ship it yourself. You have to deal with that stuff yourself. And then that becomes extremely costly if you're not doing big volumes. So it's mostly around like those margin issues and then manufacturing issues in terms of like the food and beverage. But again, that's where this is probably your best chance of success. But throw a little curveball, like on a more of a powdered based, food item brand that I don't know has done all that much in the US yet, but has really done an extremely good job in the UK is a brand called Huel, like
I've seen that.
Yeah, Huel. And they just passed in the 5th year $100 million in revenue. And most of that's coming from in-country type of thing. But it's kind of similar if people are like, what the hell is Huel? It is kind of reminiscent in the U.S. market to the Soylent, like that kind of all-encompassing, like vitamin, mineral, like optimized meal in a powder type of a situation. I know that Huel, I think, went a little bit further with that and has some different like more food options as well. But on the powder side, if you're looking to like kind of bring it into your mind to something you're used to, it'd be kind of similar to like what Soylent does in the U.S. market of like this complete kind of meal shake or ready to mix.
Crazy you brought it up because I literally just looked up Huel too, and like there was just an article on these guys like a week ago, just like literally talking about them too and how quickly they've grown and how massive they've grown. And I guess then that begs the question: if you're, and I don't know if they're privately held, Huel or not, but or even like we know like a Redcon is privately held, right? Like if you're a privately held corporation and you're a $100 million company. Is it worth the headache? I mean, in that case, you can obviously Redcon can produce in a foreign country, whatever. But like, if you're good at something and it provides you a way of life, and I mean, is it worth expanding? Like, do you need to? I don't think you need to, but it just comes down to like, do you want world domination? In the case of like Aaron Singerman, like he wants to dominate the world. We know that, and he probably will. But the big thing too with this is like, there's one word I think anytime that you want to do this, and the word is trust, and you have to trust in yourself that your product is going to be successful. But then, if you're a UK brand and you decide to do manufacturing in the States, you need to trust a manufacturer. You need to trust a contact point, a person over here, whether you hire somebody and have them move here, you hire somebody domestically, because that person needs to understand the operations of a business and able to help you run that business in North America, which, I mean, then again, are you picking the correct I mean, this is the same as, being in the homeland, but, right contract manufacturer. Do you have the right logistical plan to get this stuff out the doors to stores? I mean, that's a huge trust factor to make it work. And I think unless you are absolutely ready to take that, like if you're just a startup brand in the UK, like the last thing that should be on your mind is how to get into the States. I mean, you should probably just figure out how to sell there first. Yeah. And then, you're going to, and here's the thing. We live in a digital world, so you're always going to have people asking for your brand. Like it happens to me all the time. People in Canada, people in Europe, and like, can we get your stuff? No, you can't. I'd love to get it to you, but right now is not the time. Like I need to focus on here and now before I start taking my resources and my time and dedicating it to something that's not nearly as lucrative or as important at this time. And I think that's a big thing, right? Like I think a lot of people, we're humans. So anytime somebody wants us or wants our items or asks for it, we try to say yes. And we try to think of how to do that to the point where sometimes we don't think about what we're giving up to achieve something that might not be nearly as lucrative. So if you're a EU or UK brand, like is American market going to be lucrative? Yeah, it can be, but like you need to do a lot of things on your end to make it lucrative. So maybe now is not the time. And I think that maybe that's why there's been so many failures is that I think they jump too quick. and they try to get here. They're like, America is like the land of the free and the home of the brave and the American dream, and they want part of that themselves, but I just don't think they're set up for success to do that so quickly.
Yeah, the most overlooked cost in business is opportunity cost. People, for whatever reason, because it's not an actual fungible cost and you don't see it hit your P&L, people don't account for it enough. And it's resource allocation, especially when you're a startup like you. I mean, yeah, it's great to hear that people want you, but for you to spend all that time for, a market that might get you a couple $1,000 a year,
right?
Or you could put in that time and probably create hundreds of thousands of dollars in the U.S. market with a much easier path. Where do you go? And I think that is definitely a problem on both sides. I mean, that's the U.S. brands that jump too far over into countries too quick. Same way where the U.K. or European or Australian or whatever wants to come over here too early because they see opportunity and money signs and, they want to get a piece of that, but it pulls away from the focus that you need and brings you into a totally different, unique type of market. Did want to get your thoughts on, if you've been paying attention to any brands or ones that you think, outside of, I think you said sneak, but like, is there any of them that have caught your eye outside of US kind of generated that you think these guys got a chance? These guys could be something that we need to pay attention to.
Honestly, no. I mean, and Josh and I talked before the show, like, let's not talk about Canada or Mexico because they kind of operate in the same realm. There's a couple Canadian-based companies that, but for them it's a little bit easier, right? There's not a huge pond they have to cross over. But I have not seen. I mean, we follow individuals on social media who are part of distribution companies for these brands, right? And I see the things that they post. And outside of them posting about it, I haven't heard anything, So it's like you have to be careful not to get caught up in the small community of people on social media that sometimes maybe makes things seem bigger than what they are. And even looking at some of the things that they had posted that I haven't seen in the States here, like for instance, it's interesting that Snickers bar, for instance, right? Like they have like the high protein Snickers bar, and that's big there, but which that actually surprises me. It's not big here. Like it really does because the word protein. But then again, maybe in Europe you can use the term high protein differently than in America. I know, but I think there's like 20 grams of protein in that thing. So, there are things like that are, I guess, American brands that are successful then over there, but only over there, that I'm surprised we haven't seen here yet. But I honestly have not. I think there is a brand, Naughty Boy, right? Does that sound familiar? That I think. The only reason I'm saying this is because, like, Naughty Boy lifestyle, they use that fucking word lifestyle. With that said, I do like the branding is very similar to a brand here in the States, very similar, if not exactly the same. But they have like caricatures and like their social art, everything that they've done in terms of like social media has been cool and fun. Like I could see it getting some traction here, but again, like I don't want to get caught too much up in the touting of social media. Yes, their social platforms look great. Does that mean they're going to be successful? I mean, it could. It could. I don't know.
I'm glad that I wasn't the one that said Naughty Boy because every time I hear that come across, I just laugh a little bit. I don't know why. I have no idea why. Because I mean, there's way more idiotic brand names in the U.S. than that. So I don't want to like throw shade at them. But
I mean, it's remember one of those. There was a pre-workout called cocaine in the United States, right? Pure Cut. Who I know the guy there, and he sent me the new pre-workout. And I said, thank fucking God you changed that name. And like, cause it was, but yes, we all do dumb shit, but I mean, Naughty Boy, I see Josh Shaw. I should get you a Naughty Boy shirt for Christmas.
Watch, I'm going to get like a big package from those guys just out of nowhere.
I'm just a stickler for branding. Right. And like, even though, like I said, it's very close, to some other stuff that I've seen, like that's one that looks, I think is Applied Nutrition. Are they also, like they have a good look, kind of a USN like look, more white and blue.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're formed, but I mean, they're honestly like I said, I would walk through Feeble or Body Power and I would probably be lost. Be like, well, what is all these things? Like, and my mind would be open to everything.
Yeah, a lot of those brands. I mean, when you're talking about like the Applied, or you're talking about like the CNP or Olymp or SciTech, or like all these brands, they are very unique in their own countries or own regions. But when you move them into the U.S., there's like 1,000 of them that look like them. So it's like when you get there, you try to offer your same low price this or your same whatever. It's like there's tons of brands that do that because we have lower barriers of entry. We have different e-commerce systems that allow them to sell at lower margins, a bunch of things that are just unique to the U.S. market that like takes away the advantages. So those, like, we could have talked all about them, and some of them maybe have a unique item or two, and maybe that's how they just move in just with the hero SKU, and that's it. Like they try to be very deep into one section, kind of like if you think about Grenade, like they have supplements in the UK, but in the US it's just the bars and the spreads.
Yeah, they
and
had
I
the
think
protein
maybe they
powders
have
here and they failed.
Yeah.
So
it's maybe just going in with that like hero one that you think is going to be good, and then maybe if you have some success, you could create some scale. Then maybe you expand out. But that's, to your point, it's kind of like you walk around. It's going to seem like the sea of sameness for us because we do see so much of it in the U.S. Because we can pull like this example that all seems similar to them. Where in those countries they might only be competing against 10 other players, and that's super unique. But to us, we see 10,000, so it's a little bit different. To answer that question, in terms of like who I think has a chance, that has just kind of hit the U.S. market, but has had a really big success in kind of the Nordic European markets, is you mentioned with like NOCCO, and like I don't know about the Barbell kind of extension, but I think just the drink of be that the NOCCO, or like I think their main brand is maybe Vitamin Well or whatever. That's like the portfolio. They have a kind of a functional vitamin beverage or whatever. A lot of those I think have a very kind of a vibe to them, similar to like a Celsius / Red Bull, like because Celsius has a lot of like, they've pulled a lot of inspiration from their Nordic distributor lately, and a lot of this kind of thing where I think that might be a unique angle. They might get some traction, I think, especially because a lot of the merchandising sets now are expanding for some of these functional beverages. So you're seeing like a lot more on shelf. You're seeing a lot of the brands that are kind of what I consider maybe second tier functional energy drinks are getting a lot more shelf space. And I think because they jumped in when they did, I think they're going to get some of those spaces because it's unique. I haven't tried. I think you've tried them, right? I don't know.
They're okay. Danielle likes like the peach one a lot. But like anything, right? Like they have a couple flavors that are decent. They're 180 milligrams of caffeine, so it's nothing crazy. And they're smaller. They're not 16 ounces. So they got a unique look, different flavors. It has potential if they can get distribution.
Yeah, that one just kind of seems like, from what I've been paying attention the last couple of years, like the buzz that's been growing. I know they have some large investment groups that have thrown some money in for this expansion. So I think they have at least some firepower to try some things out. So be interested to see how that kind of expands over time. I know that they've just in the last maybe year gotten into the market. So it takes some time, especially on the beverage side, to like get the right partners on the distribution and get those conversations going. It's not like a snap of the fingers and you can get it in a Joe's supplement shop.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, like with anything, it's trial and error. It is like, how much money do you have, and that might be the biggest thing, and then work hard. So, I think not to go too long on this podcast, but I know there was one that I follow the owner on social, but like Warrior supplements in the bars, like that looks interesting to me. I don't see a lot of it here, but I think that they're making at least good headway overseas to potentially where they could come this way. I mean, their offerings on the bar side look decent, and they also have powders, and so could be another one to look at here as we move forward. So if you guys like what you heard on the podcast, hit that subscribe button, write us a review, helps out the algorithm. We're on iTunes, Spotify, we're on YouTube. You can watch that as well. Write us a comment if you're part of the EU, UK, or just a different country that's not America, outside of Mexico and Canada. Even Mexico and Canada, like, shoot over who you think is relevant, because I mean, some of the brands that I'm not familiar with all the Canadian brands either. A lot of them, but not all of them. So love to hear from you guys. Next week, we are going to be talking, I don't know, we're going to talk about something smart, or at least make it sound like it's smart anyway. Yeah, so at J. Shaw Consulting on the Instagram, at Fitness Informant for myself. We are at 2 Guys, 1 Shaker Cup on all the different platforms. Appreciate you guys tuning in.